All right. Welcome back. I hope that you had a great long weekend for MLK, and we'll go ahead and get rolling. So today is our last class meeting where we have the first set of partner introduction speeches. So we'll be talking about some of the last things that you can do to prepare, what to expect as we gear up for the speaking days. And I've also used your availability form to create a schedule so that you know which day you're scheduled to speak. I posted that on Canvas earlier. I'll be showing that in just a minute, and we'll be using that to help you to plan ahead. For the later speeches, I'm holding off since I know a number of people add and drop in the first couple weeks. So after the second week, once we have the schedule for students really solidified, I'll be posting the speaking times for the later speeches. So if you are one of the first people to present, like you're presenting on Friday, not to worry, because you will be slotted later for some of the later speeches in the class. So I'll be shuffling that around to ensure that there's some balance on the days that you're scheduled to speak. So last class, we, all the way back, took some time to spend with your partners, again, to get some details about them for your speeches. I'll be giving you a little bit more time for today, but I do encourage you to use email or time outside of class for any remaining loose ends that you need to tie up with them before giving your speeches. We talked a little bit about the process of outlining and creating speeches. And some of the ways that you can use supporting materials such as stories, such as examples, and that vivid information to really help those introduction speeches be engaging. For today, I want to spend some time discussing the rubric, which I've posted and I'll be using to grade the partner speech so you know exactly what to expect, and some of the things that you can do to be in the best position possible for giving the partner speech. And then we'll discuss some of the things to expect going forward. So here is the partner speech schedule. So on Friday, we'll have Noah, Kenzie, Mary, Lizzie, Tucker, Natalie, Audrey, Chad, and Austin. On Monday, we'll have Annika, Cade, Devin, Olivia, Skylar, Ferris, Luli, and CJ. And then next Wednesday, we will have Alofa, Jessica, Michaela, Natanya, Chris, Ella, Alexander, and Kelly. Is there anybody who's noticing either that they are not listed on the partner speech time or that they have any issues related to their partner speech day? Okay. Yes? Okay. Can you send me an email just with that information, and then I will slot you in to a day next week? Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, unless you have some updates related to your schedule to send to me, you should plan on that day. One thing to know is that this is not ordered, right? So on the day that you're scheduled to speak, that doesn't mean that, say, Michaela is speaking third on Wednesday. All that means is that that's the day that you're scheduled. So I'll be having the whiteboard over here, and that'll be numbered from either 1 to 8 or 1 to 9, right? So when you come into class, you'll enter your name next to a number on the whiteboard. So say you want to come in really early because you do not want to be the first person, you can come in early, put yourself at number 9 and go sit down, right? So that way the schedule will kind of be based as people coming in can enter it in. We'll be moving down the line from there. Okay, great. So that's the schedule for this set of speeches. We have a number of speeches on each day, but each speech is only 3 to 4 minutes. So you'll have your speech, there'll be some time for feedback, and we'll keep on moving. So for later speeches that are longer, we're going to have more days, up to 4 or 5 for speaking days. But because the speech is pretty short, you should plan on seeing several different introduction speeches. So what I would like you to do is to take some time on your own. I will be asking you to turn this in later. Now that we're in the second week of the term, I'll be formally taking attendance through activities or peer review on speaking days. So I'd like you to start to assemble the information that you have on your partner so far. I asked you to take some time to start to develop a sense of an outline for this speech. So I encourage you to take some time to continue to do that. Then I want you to take stock of information that you still might need from your partner. What are some maybe details, information, stories, or other things that you find you would still like to ask your partner? And then I want you to think about how you might structure the speech itself using this information. So how might you organize main points? How might you use an attention-getting device to hook the audience? How might you summarize these points, and so forth? So I'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to look at your outline, to begin some work on this, and we'll come together after that. So I'll give you a couple more minutes here. We'll be taking some time later in class where you get to see your partner again. So you might think about what additional questions you'd like to ask them, or if you have information for them that you'd like to confirm. You might take some time to verify the accuracy of some of the details that you plan to share. So go ahead and wrap up your current thought or idea. If you're typing or handwriting, I'll be asking you to turn this in a little bit later once you've completed part 2. But for now, you can hang on to this and use this to help you as you're continuing to think about your speech. All right. So last week, we talked about an example outline, but I'd also like to briefly go over the rubric so I can be as transparent as possible about how I'm grading your speech and what to expect here, and essentially what you can do to make sure that you are doing well in this speech. So the partner speech is out of 150 points. That's just 15%, right? So it's a very small portion of your grade. And this is an environment where we're working together and we're helping to build skills. So this is not a speech that goes perfect for anyone on the first go round. So if you're feeling a little bit anxious or you're not feeling like you did the best job, that's okay, right? Our purpose is to workshop together and to build skills in public speaking over time, which means that the grade that you'll be receiving is with that in mind, right? So the main things that I'm looking for here, first start with the outline. So what you should make sure to do is before the day that you are speaking, print 2 physical copies of your outline. The first printed copy is a version that you will give to me before you give the speech, and I'll be using that to grade and look through the outline as you're working on the speech. And then the second copy is the copy for yourself. So you're welcome to use the outline as you're working through the speech and refer back to that, right? It's designed to help you so that you can jog your memory, remember the main points that you're focusing on, and so on. I highly encourage to get your printed copy out at least a day in advance. If you are scrambling to print, if you're using the library, if you realize you need more credits to print, right? And that's happening right before your speech, you're probably going to be a little bit frazzled and you're not going to have the same amount of time to prepare. So print it out a day in advance. Let me know if you're running into issues with printing at least a day before you're scheduled to speak, and make sure that you have those physical copies ready to go. And once you do that, you'll be able to really focus on the content of the speech. In fact, I encourage you, if you print out in advance, to use your own copy of the outline to refer back to and to work on as you're practicing. So I'm asking you to turn in a full outline. It's about a page long prior to the speech. Make sure to use complete sentences for your outline, right? So it's in bullet point form, but rather than single words, make sure you're using full sentences. Make sure that you're using good conventions and avoiding typos. I also encourage you to use substructure, right? So using tab or indentation for your main points versus your subpoints versus details within those subpoints. And then making sure that your outline is a good reflection of the speech itself. You're going to go a little bit off of the exact material, right? You're not reading the outline word for word, but ideally your speech is going to accurately reflect the main ideas of the outline. So I gave that example outline in this class that you can use as you're preparing. Also, if you'd like to send me an outline in advance for review and feedback, I'm happy to look it over and let you know my thoughts. I've already received a couple of those that I'll be returning from people. So again, starting with some type of attention getter that gets us interested in thinking about the ideas that you'll be presenting in the speech, some type of thesis or main point you want to get across, a preview of the points you intend to cover in the speech, body points that provide details and information. And we'll be talking more in this class about some of the ways that you can organize the main body points of the speech. And then a conclusion that summarizes the main points and ends on a note that asks us to think going forward about the things that we should take away from the speech and what we've learned about the person. Just for fun, the speech is the speech outline example is about Sylvie, my dog, and about how she really likes sticks and going outside. So case in point, she and I were out this weekend, and just for fun, I thought I'd share what she was up to with her favorite sticks. So she has very, very large sticks that she likes to carry around. So. In any case, that outline is available for you to work on as you're preparing for that speech, and so that you have an example to go off of. The next thing that I'm looking for is for the content, right? So we talked last class about some of the ways that you can integrate supporting details. So using things like examples, to use stories and narratives. You're probably not going to use statistics, although if there's interesting information, like they're really into CrossFit and they're at this percentile at deadlifting, then maybe that's a fun detail to share. But what I'm really looking for here is that you're including rich details, supporting information, and content, right? Rather than laundry listing demographic or factual information, you're using things like examples, testimony, and effective supporting information to back up your main points. The third thing I'm looking for here is the use of organization, right? So for speeches, since your audience is not going to have the outline, they are going off of you verbally. So using things like physical positioning between your main points, so starting perhaps with your introduction over here, walking to your body point and coming back over here is one way to signpost and make clear what your points are. And don't forget, tell me what you're going to tell me, tell me what you told me. Using signposting and outlining for the audience makes sure that they can follow along, right? So including good organization in the speech itself, including a hook, body points, and a conclusion is important here. And then when it comes to delivery, right? I know some of you might feel a little bit of apprehension or anxiety going into the speech, worried that it's not going to go the way that you hope it does. Maybe you practice and you worry that you're going to freeze when you get up. One thing to think about here is that if you have a verbal pause, if you have a gap and you need to get your memory jogged, or you're hitting an issue, that's not going to be the end of the world, right? That's not a make or break for your brain. I think that the thing that really helps is your ability to recover and continue to move on past a point where you might have an issue come up in your speech, right? So maybe you reach a point, you freeze for a little bit, you need to take a pause for a few seconds. But then you remember, or you go back to your outline and realize what it is that you need to say next, and you use that to continue moving forward, right? So if you're able to come back from those moments and you're able to move on, or even if you're able to read something off of your outline, that'll help a lot as you're working through the speech. Nobody's going to be perfect. We all are going to have verbal flubs. We're going to have things that we forgot. We're going to have things that we need to refer back to. And I encourage you to do what you can to continue to work through it, right? Life happens while you're making plans. If you forget something, or if you skip something, that's okay, because unless you draw attention to it and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to say this, or I'm really nervous, right? The audience isn't going to notice it. We draw attention to things if we say them, but if we don't and we continue to work through ideas, that'll help delivery a lot. So what I'm looking here for is if you're engaged, if you're dynamic, if you're practicing and preparing with the audience and showing interest in the topic overall, right? So you've put in some work to think through how you'd like to give this speech and engage with us. And that's what I'm really looking for when it comes to delivery. So that all is a total of 150 points. Does anybody have any questions related to this speech, related to the rubric, or related to anything else as you gear up? If you do have any questions as you're preparing for the speech, please let me know. Again, I'll ask on speaking days that we avoid using electronics while other people are speaking. I will be having the paper copies of the peer feedback forms that you can use on those days. So we'll also want to continue to work on our skills as a listening member and participant in the audience. So as mentioned, again, the main point, a hook, and the use of a conclusion are ways that you can really work on your structure and outlining for the speech, right? A hook might be an interesting fact, a statistic, something that really helps us to learn more about this person, or a detail that you'd like to share that really drew your attention to them. Connecting that to the main point of the speech, previewing those main points. We'll be talking about some of the ways that you get to organizationally structure those main points, and then a conclusion that, again, is capping off those key ideas. As mentioned, making sure to print out 2 copies in advance is not only helpful to give you peace of mind, but also helps you so that you can give the speech with that paper outline there to refer to. One thing you can also do, if you so choose, is for your own copy, you can cut it up into like smaller note card versions. That way, you're not holding as big of a sheet of paper. Or you can place your outline on the table so that you can use that to refer back to later. One thing that I encourage you to do is to rehearse the first few sentences. So maybe it's your tension getter and your thesis, but if you really practice getting those first few sentences down, then it's easy for you to snap back into those. And even if you don't have the rest of your speech like down and practice the same way every time, you'll find that you're able to snap into the rest of your speech a lot easier when you have that start to the speech that you're really, really comfortable with, right? I also encourage you to practice the very end of the speech, such as the last sentence or two, because oftentimes that's the area that we neglect. And having a good clincher and end to the speech is important for the note that you're leaving things on for your audience. As mentioned, I encourage you to do a little bit of searching about tongue twisters or vocal warm-ups. Maybe you have some tongue twisters that you're a really big fan of. Sally sells seashells by the seashore, cinnamon aluminum, red leather, yellow leather, unique New York, New York's unique. I know you need unique New York, right? You might use some examples there, or you might practice kind of vocal range. So singing along to something in the car, or practicing speaking at a high pitch versus a low pitch. So I encourage you to do a little bit of practice ahead of time so that you can get your voice warmed up. Another thing to remember here is that the clock is your enemy. So I encourage you to really practice your timing, right? Give the speech, see how long that speech has taken for you. What you're really shooting for is that 3 to 4 minute range. So if you're way under, there's probably more content to add to the speech, or you're rushing through the speech a little too quickly. And if you are well over the 4 minutes, there's some things that you can cut out. I will be giving you time signals, right? So I'll be letting you know how many minutes you have left in your speech. Once you get to the 4 minute mark, I will ask that you, in the next sentence or two, wrap up your main points. The time goes by a lot faster than you think it will, right? So one other thing that you can do is to mark for yourself what point in the speech you should be at by which minute mark, right? So if you know that you have 2 minutes left, maybe that's when you should be at the 3rd point in your speech. And you know that when you've practiced it before, that at the 2 minute mark, you get to the 3rd main point of your speech. So maybe you use that to adjust how quickly you speak, or maybe you cut out a couple of details so that you're on track for the time that you practiced. So I do encourage you to not only practice your timing, but also to figure out for yourself at what minute in your speech you should be at what particular point. And then think about this idea here of having a casual audience, right? You have an audience of people who are here to support you. But I also encourage you, if you have like a roommate, if you have a parent or family member, or even if you just want to record it for yourself, giving the speech to somebody and then receiving feedback from them. You're also welcome to practice the speech with me in office hours or set up an appointment with me if those office hours don't work, so that you can practice that speech too. Whiteboard will post the speaking order for you to write your name down, as mentioned. On speaking days, I will be handing out peer review forms and asking you to complete a number of those on speaking days to count toward attendance. And then if you're speaking on the day, right, once you've completed your speech, you don't need to complete a form, but I do ask that you stay for the full class meeting, because we're both building skills as speakers, but also as audience members. So having a good audience and having people that are here to support and to listen to each other is super important. So what I'd like to do here is talk a little bit about organization and the role that you can organize your speech to fulfill. So when it comes to organization, again, your audience is not going to remember the full speech. What they're going to remember about you introducing your partner are the interesting details, the stories, the things that you were really engaged about, the things that evoke vivid imagery. So oftentimes we have what's known as the recency effect, where typically we will remember the very beginning and the very end of your speech, not so much the middle. So using structure, tell me what you're going to tell me, tell me what you told me is a good way to make sure that the audience remembers. So that format, I think, is a really useful way to help to structure and understand the details of your speech as a whole. And I want to go through some different ways that you can incorporate organization into your speech, especially as you're starting to develop what your main body points might look like. So there are different patterns of organization that you can use, which are spatial, temporal, topical, problem solution, cause effect, and rambling. And you might be using one of these formats for your introduction speech, but as we get into later speeches in the class, like the informative or persuasive speech, you might start to find that there's a different organizational structure that works better in that context. So these different ways of organizing are really useful as you're taking that material that you've learned from your partner and really putting it into the content of your speech. So spatial is the way that we use physical place and we invoke movement into a speech. One easy way of thinking about spatial organization is to think about a tour. So if somebody is taking you on a tour of EOU campus, right? Maybe they take you over to Ackerman, they show you that this used to be a K-12 school. Maybe they're taking you over to the gym, right? They're organizing their presentation to you based on the different locations that you're going to. Or maybe you're providing an informative speech about the different islands in Hawaii, and you're showing us the different islands, you're guiding us through using visual aids to show us those different parts, right? So it's using visual imagery in order to help us understand and follow along the different parts of the speech that you're using, right? So something like a tour is a good example here of how we use spatial organization. Likely not the format you're going to be using for this speech, since it doesn't include visual aids, but something to think about as you're going forward in speeches in the class. Temporal, right? So if you've seen the recorded production or a live production, right, of Hamilton, that's an example here of temporal organization and some of the ways that fictionalized temporal organization or embellished temporal organization can be used, right? So typically, when we are following along with a movie, with a story, it has a start and it has an end. And unless we're watching something that's very nonlinear and has kind of fragmented storytelling styles, for instance, movies such as Memento, right, where it goes from different points in nonlinear fashion. There's a beginning of the story, there's a middle, there's an end. And that structure could be really useful as we're following along and understanding the points of the speech. One way that you might use this is to talk about the early life and background of your partner, right? These are some of the things that happened early in their lives. They went to the school, then they got a football scholarship here. And then the second point might be the more recent things going on in their lives, coming to EOU, joining the college team, and so on. So we can think about this in a historical way, right? The actual temporal sequence, past, present, right? Or early, middle, present might be one way of doing that. And there's also the use of narrative, where it's not necessarily a linear time sequence, but it's about using storytelling in a way that helps us to follow along the characters and the situation that's unveiling over time. So for instance, there are historical inaccuracies, of course, in a production like Hamilton or in something like a biopic, right? If you've seen biopics like Elvis or Bohemian Rhapsody, they don't follow one-to-one the way things played out in history, but they're arranged in a way that's designed to make a story that seems compelling or that makes sense. So maybe there's not a linear way that you tell the story, but you're telling it to evoke a particular narrative experience. Topical. So this is a pretty common way of structuring a speech and its main points too. Topical organization means that you are dividing your speech into different topics. or issues that are related to the subject at hand. So maybe your partner is somebody who is really into tennis and also really into horseback riding. And you've discovered over getting to know them that those are two big things in their lives. So maybe you structure your speech based on those two different topics and things they're really interested in, right? So an informative speech about a horse, maybe you're telling us about how horses are used in horseback riding. Maybe you're telling us about different types of horses. And maybe you're telling us about horses used for work in other contexts, like horse-drawn carriages. So you might tell us a whole lot about horses divided into different categories or groups. So topical organization is a pretty common one and is one that makes a whole lot of sense if there are different categories of things that you've learned about your partner that you might choose to incorporate. So problem solution is a format that you can use for your persuasive speech later on in the class. I think that's the best context to use this type of format. But you can think about what the issue is. So for example, maybe you say that we have dumped a whole lot of plastic waste into the oceans. What this causes is destruction of a variety of endangered species and threatens the ocean ecosystem. And then you are proposing in your persuasive speech the use of reusable bags as a solution to that issue. Okay? So problem solution is presenting the issue, is helping us to understand what we can do to address it. And that's important for something like a persuasive speech, because if we don't agree that something is a problem, then we're not going to be on board or care about doing something to address it. Or perhaps we've explained an issue and then we say, okay, so what? What can we do about it? So this is a good format in persuasive speaking, likely not one you'll use in your partner speech. You can think about it as, calling somebody like a plumber. If you've got an issue, such as your sink's not working the way that it needs to, you call a plumber, they come in, and they help, and they fix it. Cause effect, right? So this is oftentimes used, again, in something like an informative speech. So you discuss a cause of a problem, a cause of an issue, or a circumstance, and then what happens as a result of that circumstance, right? So a lot of different theories and approaches that explain why the dinosaurs died out, right? Maybe it was an asteroid and so on, right? So you say there was this asteroid that came down from the sky, and as an effect of that, right, the dinosaurs were gone. So cause effect is a good way of helping us understand the issue and the results of that issue. One way you could incorporate this into your speech is if you want the style to say, here is a thing that my partner recognized as an issue or problem, and here's what my partner did to address it. So maybe they were gearing up for a big game, or maybe they really needed to go to college and they were working on saving up money to go to college, and as a result, they ended up here. So problem, solution, and cause effect are especially useful for persuasive speech formats. And then there's rambling, which I encourage you to avoid, right? Rambling doesn't really have much of a pattern. It's very much a stream of consciousness, jumping between ideas, topics, issues, and so on, and doesn't really utilize an organizational style. So you should avoid the use of rambling in your speeches whenever possible. So what I want to do is, since we very recently had MLK Day, I do want to take the time to share a little bit of MLK's famous I Have a Dream speech, because I think that this speech is a great example of not only incorporating vivid and rich content, but I also want you to pay attention to the use of organizational structure and style in this speech too. So I think this speech does a great job of incorporating supporting details and organizing those details in a useful way. And I want you to pay attention of the organizational styles we've talked about, which you feel like would best match the things you're noticing in this speech.
Thank you, Dr. Martin Luther King. On with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, the great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a red beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream. Skinned by the content of that character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of imposition and notification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
All right, so there's more to this one, but I think this captures some of the key ideas and points here. How many people have had the chance to see this speech in another context, like in another class? Okay, so several of you. So what are some things that you noticed about this speech, particularly in terms of its organization or structure? Yes, Mary.
I think when we mentioned for problem and solution, he first mentioned the map, the history, like to grab the attention to as a hook. He mentioned the history, so people he said this is a great day in history, so people think, okay, why this day is a great day in history, so they can pay more attention. And also he mentioned the slavery, which is a big problem, and said that it's still there, and many people are still slaves. That was the problem when we talked about the effect that children, Black children, do not play with other children, and what are the problems that Black people are facing, and also the solution. The solution was like to be together, to when they live together, and to bring that brotherhood between all the people.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Right, the use of problem solution. Also discussing the facts is definitely present in organization of the speech, really highlighting examples of segregation and discrimination still experienced and outlining a sort of vision for how to address or deal with that. Other things that folks noticed. Yes.
I thought it was more temporal. It is very historical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what his ideas of the Constitution look like.
Yeah.
It begins with the start of history of how the world of slavery and then how we've transitioned, but we are still in the shape and he wishes to continue that.
Yeah. So the use of temporal organization, as you're pointing out, is also a big element, right? Looking at the past, the history of racism and segregation, the experiences of slavery, right? Looking at the present and ongoing issues of racial segregation, and kind of painting an image of the future, right? And using kind of a future-oriented goal, right? I have a dream, future-oriented, as a way of imagining a solution to those issues too. Just saw a hand up on the side. Yeah. 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 The use of repetition is something that's especially useful in speeches, right? I have a dream is very notable and well remembered because it's used as the start of a sentence in a lot of different contexts. And the use of that sentence is something that even if we haven't seen the speech before, we're very likely familiar with. It's a powerful device to remind us of that issue. So the use of repetition can be a really effective strategy, especially for framing, right? Of how to address particular issues. Perhaps it's related to race relations. Perhaps it's related to ending segregation. There's like different ways that that sentence was used to highlight different points at a topical level too. So there's examples here of a lot of these different organizational styles that play in the speech. I know having that speech right before your own might feel a little bit like a tough act to follow, but I do think that thinking about how you use structure is important. So when it comes to organization, it's a good idea to use 3 different levels of abstraction at most, right? So you have perhaps a main point, like a body point, like I'm going to talk about how my partner is really into painting and how they love to paint. Within that, I'm going to talk about how they use acrylics and give an example of acrylics, or perhaps an example of watercolors. If you get too much into substructure, then you start to lose the audience. If you say, you know, my subpoint C of my main point A, which is also a subpoint of B, right, we start to lose you there. Citing sources within a speech, we'll be talking about that later in the class, but you might say at certain points, my partner expressed to me, or my partner told me this story. For later speeches in the class, I will be asking you to verbally include the use of sources in the speech itself. As we've talked about, I encourage you not to write the speeches down word for word, to give yourself the opportunity to speak in a way that makes sense or resonates with what's coming out in the moment. So perhaps there's that example, you have a few things to say about it, but you're not saying it in the same sentences every single time. So what I'd like you to do is to take some time to return back to your partner. If your partner is not here today, you might draft an email or text message for any remaining information that you're interested in gathering from them. And then once you've done that, I want you to return to part 1 of your attendance and start to note which organizational pattern, such as temporal, topical, cause effect, problem solution, and so forth, might you use for your speech. Think about some ideas here and prepare to turn in that part 2. Take some time to chat with your partner, then think about and write down the organizational style that you're looking to use for this speech. Yes. So the part one is just, well, yeah, I can pull that back. So the part one was information you have about your partner, information you still need about your partner, how you might start to structure the speech. Yeah. Do you have any questions? A couple more minutes with your partner and jot down that organizational style you might use if you haven't done so already. So go ahead and wrap up your conversation here. If you have additional time you might need to spend with your partner, you might schedule a time to chat over text, on the phone, through email, outside of class. If you're turning in a paper copy of your attendance activity, you might take a photo of it in case you need to use it to help as you're working on your outline. So I encourage you to do that since I'll be grabbing that. Yeah, if you typed it out, you're welcome to email that to me. So once you've completed it, please pass forward with your name on it or email me the attendance activity that you've completed for today. Took some time today to talk about organization and structure for the partner speeches. Next class, we will get rolling on this first set of speeches. So look forward to that on Friday and have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next class. Yeah.
It's just a couple of versions. I didn't write it all.
Oh, that's all right. What?
Because I know you had it up, but I just like forgot to.
This right here?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Got it. Thanks. Okay. Sure. Thanks. And I have the slides posted on Canvas too. Yeah. Hi, Mary.
Hi, can I send you my outline with the information that I collected today?
Yeah,
Will that
absolutely.
work?
Yeah, just email that to me and I'll send you my feedback.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You have a-
Thank you, Mary.
Sorry that I didn't put it on the availability form.
That's okay. It sounds like you originally thought you were going to make it in time and then there was a scheduling change. So
we have meets like every weekend for like the next like 6 weeks, but most of the time we leave like afternoon on Fridays. So I thought that I would be able to like
yeah,
make it to this class most of the time. But do you want me to like refill out the form?
yeah, that might be helpful just to make sure that I can get you at the different times.
Should I just like block out like every Friday? Is that fine?
Yeah, since that might be a time that you might not be able to make it.
Okay.
And then I will, if that works for you, I will move you to Monday.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
What are we supposed to be turning in?
So the attendance activity, I asked folks to start by sharing the information that they had on the partner, information they still needed for the partner, how they might structure the speech. So that was part one that I asked folks to work on at the beginning of class.
Okay.
And then part two was figuring out the organizational structure that you plan to use for the speech.
Something like this.
Yeah, so it looks like you've got it. So if you want to go ahead and send me a photo of that,
Okay.
that way I can just punch that in for attendance.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just send you a photo.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.